So Gael an fáilte chu raibh Jackie de Brún seo. So we'd love to welcome Jackie in, and I'm delighted to introduce her on behalf of Glór Dúirtíre and Scoil Shéamuis Néill. So she's going to talk today on the effects of bilingualism and the cognitive and linguistic development of children. Jacqueline has a wealth of knowledge in this area, and she is an assistant professor in the School of Language, Literacy and Early Childhood Education in Dublin City University. Prior to this role, Jacqueline worked as an education advisor in the Áisaonad in St Mary's University College in Belfast. During her time there, she helped to create a wealth of resources for immersion schools. She provided professional development on the implication of resources in the context of immersion classroom and the curriculum. As a former primary school teacher, Jacqueline has taught a range of age groups, and she supervised the publication of Cliath, a reading programme for early years readers. And she was a project manager in the production of Phonic na Gaeilge, the phonics programme for Irish. She's published research on children's books in Irish and is currently undergoing a PhD in Irish reading. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jacqueline.
Thanks, Gráinne So, as Gráinne said, I'm going to be talking today on the effects of bilingualism on cognitive and linguistic development, but I want to kind of focus on the linguistic. I'll go through the cognitive as well, but it's not my field. And you know, the facts are all there, and I'll kind of show you all the kind of the information that's available. But my area is really the linguistic development, so I'll probably be focusing more on that. And to be honest, all the good stuff is with the cognitive, and the linguistic is where we have the kind of, oh, we need a wee bit of work done here. So that's kind of where I'm coming in to try to do a wee bit of work here and see what we can do. So I'm gonna, like, a wee bit about myself. Just got a wee cartoon. I thought it looked like me on here, and just to kind of say why me? Why would I be talking here about bilingualism? So and my own background, I didn't learn Irish until I was a teenager in secondary school. Like most people, I didn't go to an immersion school. I just learned Irish in school, but I didn't actually do well. I failed in first year, and my father sent me to Chomhairleoir. So Chomhairleoir is where, you know, you do it, it's night classes more or less, but Chomhairleoir has a very specific approach where they do, it's all kind of immersion. And it's all through Irish, a wee bit like the schools, the Néill schools and the Bun schools have that approach where everything is done through Irish. And it was really the Chomhairleoir, that's where I got my Irish, I could say, more so than school. I didn't do well in school. Then I started doing well in school, and that was the influence of the Chomhairleoir. So I'm going to come back to that later on, that kind of approach to learning languages and how that can affect the learner. So that's my background. I then became a Gaelscoil teacher, and I kind of had experience in the early years, and then the later years I had Rangahi and Rangada, and then I moved Rangacuig and then Rangashat. So it was kind of interesting to see the big span of the year groups and how they develop over the years, and what kind of how they develop both languages. And then, as Gráinne said, I was in St Mary's for a while in the Áiseanad working on resources, and I'm currently in DCU, where I work what they call as L1 and L2 schools. L1 schools are immersion schools, so Gael schools like we have in the north, I suppose, and the L2 schools are English schools where you do Irish, and even they are taking on that new approach of immersion, and they immerse the children in, say, an hour a day where they do Irish, and then they're encouraged to use their Irish all day. So they'll use phrases, they'll use things in the yard, and it's all very practical. So this is all coming from the new curriculum. I also have 3 children that were brought up with both Irish and English. So Irish is the language of our home, where we spoke Irish to the children, and they oh, they'll get English. They just picked it up off the, I don't know, the walls or something. They just got it outside. And then when they went to school, they kind of picked, because I actually took time off work and everything too. So it wasn't even as if they were in a creche. So it was kind of, they picked up English. Just shows you, you know, it's going to happen. They're going to get it anyway. And as a parent, even myself, I was actually particularly with the eldest fella, I was probably very concerned. How does this work? And how, you know, being monolingual myself brought up, it was kind of, oh, how does this work with 2 languages? And you just realize years later, what was I concerned about? What was the big worry? They're just like sponges. They just pick it up and move on, and it's really not an issue. So that's really kind of the main thing here is the children, it's not a big issue. And I think sometimes we make it a big issue, but as we see here, most of the world is bilingual. And we're probably coming at it from our own background, and probably that kind of, probably, you know, the UK, maybe a lot of America as well, those kind of big kind of countries that influence us are monolingual. And that is having a big influence on the world and on education kind of systems and that around the world. But really, bilingualism is the most common model. And so we shouldn't really worry about it. You know, it is a natural process, and it's something that happens in other places. So bilingualism affects linguistic and cognitive performance across the lifespan. So this is not something just that influences, you know, little children and they're starting off on their path in the Ollscoil. It's something that affects you across your life, your whole life. So it's a big, big deal, and it's very natural. So that's how we should really look at it. So Colin Baker famously made this list in 2003, and it's well quoted by a lot of kind of support structures and that for Gaelscoils and for Ollscoils. You know, you'll see this a lot on like websites that are kind of promoting bilingualism. The whole idea, the curriculum, culture, character, communication, cognitive, and finance. So these are all advantages, the advantages of bilingualism, and that there's, you know, this whole list of advantages that go with bilingualism. And just to go through each one of those, I'm going to focus more on the linguistic and the cognitive later on, but just the other ones that are just kind of, you know, the cultural advantages, for example. And I'm saying possible because obviously not everyone is the same and not everything affects everyone the same way. But these are the things that we should build on and that we try to build on. And that I know just from working in different schools and working with different, you know, even north and south, that cultural advantage is a huge thing that is promoted in Gaelscoils. It's very important. It's just that recognizing the values and cultures associated with more than one language, and that encourages the acceptance of other cultures. And that's very important in today's society when we are kind of mixing with so many other cultures and so many other people coming in, that when you have two languages and you're dealing with two cultures, you kind of recognize the importance of that for other people as well. It's important for you, therefore it's important for other people, and that's part of having another language. So having your own language and culture fosters an understanding of the importance of language and culture for others as well. So that's part of that advantage. Possible advantages for character. So language can foster and strengthen a sense of identity. So you know who you are. When you have your language, you know who you are and where you've come from and what you're doing, and that's important for character building and for your own character. And another language, can have a positive effect on intergroup relationships, identity, and self-esteem as well. So those are kind of positives for your own character as a person. And just as a child growing up, and you're growing up in this, you know, the two languages, that you would have that kind of a, you know, self-esteem and identity and understand relationships better. So that's another positive. Possible financial benefits. Having two languages can have financial benefits related to employment, promotion, and earnings. So obviously it depends on the job, it depends on what it is you're going to be doing, but it's been found to be associated, and I thought this one was interesting, with decreased likelihood of dropping out of college and increased probability of getting a higher status job and higher earnings. So you couldn't really argue with that one. Now, again, these are possibles, and it depends on the age of the person, the job, the place, and the language and the status of the language. So as well as that, it also depends on your knowledge of the language. So obviously to get a job as a translator, say in Brussels, you would have to have a very high standard of, if you're going to be doing it with Irish and English, you would need to have them at a really good standard. So, I mean, a lot of these benefits, it's when you reach a high standard that those benefits kick in. But those are other benefits as well. I think that's an interesting one about the decreased likelihood of dropping out of college. And that piece of research is interesting. It's that bilingual people, because they're used to kind of doing things in two languages, they've kind of more of a I don't know, more of a sticking to things approach, and I just thought that was an interesting one as well. We talk a lot about cognition, and that was one of the benefits of Colin Baker there. And what is cognition? So, bilingualism is great for cognition. What does that even mean? So cognition is the mental process involved in learning and understanding. So whatever processes that are going on in your head when you're learning something, anything at all, even if you're learning to change the tire of a car, there's a cognitive process going on there. There's something in your head that's you're remembering the different stages, and then you remember to do it again. That's cognition. Metacognition, and that's another aspect of it, is knowing about knowing. So that involves awareness. So do I know how to do that? Oh, I'm not too sure. That's your cognition, and that's when you start to question things. And so cognition and metacognition are both kind of involved and they're enhanced by bilingualism. So in cognitive development, and this is Piaget's stages, there are different stages in cognitive development, and you can see them laid out there, kind of broken down, particularly in younger years, that there are different stages. But once you get to about 12, you've reached the kind of stage where you're going to be at, and they stay the same after that. But bilingualism affects every one of those stages, and every one of those stages will be different in a monolingual person and in a bilingual person. So those are kind of big things to think about. They're actually enhanced in a bilingual person. So when I said at the beginning that the cognitive aspects of the advantages are bigger, this is where they all are, and that's all kind of enhanced by bilingualism. There's lots of research that backs that up. So there's also this other aspect that's called mental flexibility, and Péile and Lambert talked about this in 1962, but they didn't really say what they meant by it, and people were kind of, oh yeah, it's one of those say, oh yeah, when you're bilingual you have mental flexibility, but what even does that mean? So, and a lot of these things kind of that are thrown out when you're bilingual, you're this and you're that, but you don't really kind of, what does that actually mean? You know, in real terms, what is that? How does that affect me? So bilinguals do sometimes have an advantage in inhibition, but they also have an advantage in selection. Bilinguals have an advantage in switching, but they also have an advantage in sustaining attention. So there's kind of like opposites here, where bilinguals can do both these things. So when you say an advantage in switching, you can switch languages, but you can focus your attention on one thing as well. So that's that kind of mental flexibility. Bilinguals do sometimes have an advantage in working memory, but they also have an advantage in representation and retrieval. So together, this pattern sounds like mental flexibility. So that's the ability to adapt to ongoing changes and process information efficiently and effectively. So there's a whole lot of things there that really suggest that you are mentally flexible, that you can kind of move your head. You don't realize you're doing it, but you're jumping in and out of different thoughts. And that's something that bilinguals do quite easily. And I'm just going to move these pictures again, if they'll go. So research has revealed the advantages of bilinguals over monolinguals. So as I said, increased control over attention. You're probably saying, Gráinne, oh, I work in the Scoil, they're all over the show, but they do focus, they have a better focus, and there's a lot of research to show this, that you know, children can focus on more things, bilingual children more so than monolingual children. They have an improved working memory as well, so remembering things, recall, and better abstract and symbolic representation, better problem solving, more creative and divergent thinking, and increased awareness of the needs of the listener, and better executive control. So those are the big main ones that bilinguals, the cognitive advantages that bilinguals have over monolinguals. And you'll always hear about this executive control. So what is executive control? So executive control is that where, I'm going to move this over to here, and the use of complex mental processes and cognitive abilities to carry out goal-directed behavior. So again, you're going, oh, what does that mean? So bilinguals regularly resolve the conflict created by the joint application of two or more languages. So if I'm in a classroom and I say to a child, oh, go mach agus aber le de wami, gemeen met je kriechnu or a heen a clog amorach. And that child walks out to the door, a parent has come to collect the child after school, and the child immediately says, the teacher says we'll be finishing at 1 o'clock tomorrow. So they were able to listen to what I said, understand it, put it in their heads, walk to the door and say it in another language. They know not to say Héanna Clug's for that person, 1 o'clock's for that person. They've got that executive control that they can listen in one language and tell someone else in another language. So that's pretty amazing. When we take it for granted, we kind of go, yeah, they'll just tell their mummy that, and you just assume that that's normal. That's pretty amazing when you think of small children who can do that and not even think about it. And that's executive control, that you know in what context you will use these words and in what context you will use these words. So for small children, that's pretty amazing. And then that affects other aspects of your life, that you can use those choices in other things. So that's executive control. There's a lot of kind of, the whole cognitive side of bilingualism is kind of linked to a lot of brain research. So they can take these kind of, images, brain images, and see what's happening in the person's head when these things are all happening. So they know that in a bilingual person, there's all this activity going on in the brain that's not going on with a monolingual person. So there's a lot more brain usage and a lot more happening. And we do just take it for granted. I think we need to make more of this. It is pretty amazing. So the main empirical finding for the effect of bilingualism on cognition is the evidence for enhanced executive control in bilingual speakers. So this has also been found across the lifespan. So that's the big one. And other people will say, well, maybe they're not really focused attention that much, or they're not remembering stuff and that type of thing. And there's some research as well to do with Alzheimer's and bilingualism. But then there's also kind of the opposite and exceptions. So some of these things are not completely conclusive, but the executive control one is a definite, and that's really the big one. That's the big cognitive advantage, is the executive control. So whenever a bilingual person is speaking, so this is kind of moving into the linguistic side of things. When a bilingual person is using language, both languages are right there at the same time. So when I'm speaking to you in English now, even though a monolingual person will just think I'm speaking normally English, but the Irish is right there and it's kind of fighting to get out as well. And sometimes this is why, when I say they're both languages of a bilingual speaker are constantly active to some degree, and the evidence is in interference. So when you hear someone speaking English and Irish words come in, or when a person's speaking Irish and English words come in, that's evidence that both languages are right front at the same time. They're struggling, they're in competition. And that's kind of something that's kind of new, because in the past, it was thought that when you're speaking English, you've kind of put the other language way back and it's gone. And then when you're speaking Irish, say, you've pushed the other language back and it's gone and you're just speaking Irish, but that's not the case. Both languages are active both at the same time. So that's kind of, and it explains a lot, because sometimes, if I'm not used to speaking about things like this in English, and Irish words are constantly coming into my head right now, and I'm going, no, I'm speaking English, stop it, go away. And that, that makes sense to me, that's why that's happening. So there's evidence that both languages are competing for selection, with bilinguals having to resolve these competitions while picture naming in one language or another. So there's this constant kind of conflict going on, and that's the nature of bilingualism. So by learning two languages, you're having two meanings. It is postulated that bilinguals develop a greater understanding and insight into the arbitrary and symbolic nature of language. That's kind of important whenever you're thinking of other languages. So I'm looking out the window here and I can see a tree, but it's also a cran. And neither of those words are more important than the other word. They're completely arbitrary. Who made up the word tree? Who made up the word cran? They came from somewhere, but to me, hearing those words, they might as well be called something else. It doesn't really matter. but it's associated with that object, which means then if you told me that object in French, in German, in Chinese, I can accept that. Monolingual children find that hard to accept. And you'll hear sometimes, you probably have experienced this, Gráinne, in the Néill, whenever children come in that aren't used to Irish, and you're suddenly telling them that this is banya, and they're saying, no, it's milk, and they're arguing with you because their mummy told them that that was called milk, and you're saying it's called banya. They haven't reached that stage yet where that's arbitrary. When they go on up in through the school, they just accept that. Yeah, there's 2 words for everything, or there's 3 words for everything, and they just accept it. But at that early stage, they kind of struggle, and they haven't reached that yet. So bilinguals are very open to new words. That means that they're actually better than at learning new vocabulary in any language because they just soak them in. They will not kind of push against it. They'll keep wanting to learn more. So that's kind of part of the bilingual process. So just like the cognitive development, there's also the linguistic development. And, you know, any parent will recognize these phases, you know, 3 months cooing and gurgling, 6 months babbling, 12 months is the first words, 18 months, maybe know 5 to 40 words, and it progresses. You would recognize that process. So that's the typical developmental trajectory, and it may change. You know, it's just the typical, it's just an example. But with bilingualism, it depends then on when the other language is introduced. So, for example, children starting in the Néill, starting Irish for the first time, they don't go back to cooing and gurgling. They don't start babbling. They'll start at that other stage that they're already at. So we don't backtrack. You kind of go from where you are. So it depends on what stage you're at when you're learning the language that you'll do that. But it's very important that they have language as early as possible. So, I mean, Néill is probably typically what, 3-4 years old, Gráinne, would that be right?
Yeah, 3 turning 4, yeah. 3.
So 3, if that's the earliest you can get them in, that's great. But if you can get them in even earlier, that's even better. So kind of, you know, toddler clubs, you know, parent and baby groups, that type of thing, where they can hear Irish as early as possible is going to set them off even better on the right track. And the Néill years are vital before they go into school as well. And just even from my own experience of working on the reading programme, the difference across schools with children who had Néill experience and children who didn't have Néill experience going into Rangahéin, and the Rangahéin who had been in the Néill, or maybe even for 2 years, they were really a lot more ready to start reading than the ones who hadn't been, because they had already got some language, they'd already had that kind of start, and it makes a huge, huge difference. The earlier, the better. Also, there's a difference, and going back to my own experience of learning Irish in school and learning Irish in the Clonard, between language acquisition and language learning. So normally in a secondary school, you learn the language, so you're given lists of verbs, you learn this vocabulary off by heart. It's that kind of an approach. Whereas the immersion is they acquire the language. So it'll be like me moving to France tomorrow and everyone's speaking French and I have to just get French. I'm not going to sit with my list of verbs and my list of vocabulary. I'm just going to kind of be immersed and try to get it that way. So that's the difference. And that's the approach we try to take in the schools. So the kind of process of them, they move from understanding. So that first experience in the Néill, they go from understanding and then the code switching where they kind of maybe use an odd word here and there in Irish and it's mostly English, and then more and more words in Irish and English to formulas. So they'll say things like Guramoihogut and Chifame to Amarach or Be Moich. They'll get wee phrases and then they move on to free usage. So it's different from, if we go back to the stages here, where the cooing and the babbling, the first words, the second language goes from understanding, code switching, formulas to free usage. So it's a different kind of a, you know, journey, but they then follow the same steps and they get to the same place. So the linguistic advantages of bilingualism. So as I said, most of the advantages of bilingualism are non-linguistic, they're mostly cognitive. So the linguistic, and I'm going to give you the good things first, and then I'll show you the bits where we need to do a wee bit of work. So the advantages are the phonological awareness and the meta-linguistic awareness. So we talked a wee bit about meta-linguistic as kind of that awareness of languages. Phonological awareness is probably a big, huge one for the early years. And you would do a lot of that stuff in the Scoil with them, Gráinne, and they would do a lot of it in the early years as well, sort of like rhymes and stories and sounds, and it's all kind of oral syllables, sort of clapping, breaking up words, that kind of thing is all phonological awareness. Now, it doesn't matter what language that's done in. It doesn't matter whether they do it in English, Irish, German, French, it doesn't matter. It's the concepts. So it just so happens that English and Irish have a very similar system to do with rhymes and syllables and phonemes. So that's great. I mean, if you were doing, say, Chinese, it's going to be extremely different. They're not kind of similar languages, but Irish and English are both alphabetic languages, so they're more similar. And if you do rhyme, I mean, things like, I'm just thinking of some of those, you know, the likes of I suppose the Gruffalo is in Irish, but it's probably not a brilliant translation. It's difficult in Irish. But well, my point is, if you do it in English, it doesn't matter. It's the same concept. So just reading books to them, reading rhymes, focusing on syllables, all that helps in their development of phonological awareness. And as I say, it doesn't matter what language it's in. Metalinguistic awareness is more about the ability to think about languages. It's the kind of the form. It's the fact that you know to say Guramahagat, even though that's a very complex, grammatically, you know, structured phrase, you just say it and you don't think about it. And it's that structure, and to know how, I mean, things like if you have a H in a word, that there's the word mommy, but then you'll have mawami. It's changed and the meaning has changed. But that's something that happens in Irish, and they become aware of that. They know that that doesn't happen in English. Something else, you might put an ed at the end of a word in English, or ing, and that changes the meaning, and they know that happens in English. So that's metalinguistic awareness. It's when you know this happens in this language, but it never happens in that language, and this happens in that language, but it never happens in that language. And that's how you kind of separate them. And you know that there are different rules and different changes and different things going on, and they change the form and structure. So that's metalinguistic awareness. So again, these things can happen in any language, but in a bilingual person, they are magnified. Bilingual, I remember speaking when I was working in the board, the Education and Library Board in Belfast, and the team who were working on all the phonological awareness stuff, they didn't have a word of Irish, but they were going in and out of English schools and Irish schools, Gael schools as well, to do their programme. And they kept coming back to me every time they went to a Gael school and saying, that's amazing, those children just pick things up like that. They were just, they were amazed at the difference in the children in the Gael schools compared to the children in the English schools. Now, there's no research on this, local research, to tell us this, and that's the kind of thing we need, because I think we need it for our own confidence to be able to say, look, these schools are great, they're doing so well in this. But in any language, the bilingual children will be better at phonological awareness and metalinguistic awareness than monolingual children. Doesn't matter what languages they're dealing with, it's just a bilingual, monolingual difference, and that's magnified with bilingual children. However, so I did say that there were some linguistic bits that were not brilliant, and we need to work on these. So bilinguals generally control a smaller vocabulary in each language than monolinguals. So 2 children, one's got Irish and English and one's only got English. The child with only English will have more vocabulary in English than the bilingual child in English. But you put them both together, the bilingual child will have more. But the problem with that is in assessments, they're assessed separately. And I'm kind of one of those, I'm kind of pushing for a specific assessment for bilinguals where both languages are taken into consideration, because these monolingual assessments that they do don't take all their extra bits, all that, you know, different bigger information of phonological awareness and morphological awareness. It doesn't take that into consideration because it's only looking at one language at a time. So that's a different thing. So, I mean, we're not getting the full recognition. We know ourselves. I think that's important too. We know ourselves. But if you compare monolingual English to a bilingual English, they've got more vocabulary, and that's kind of international. Bilinguals have slower lexical retrieval. So during speeded tasks required processing. So that's example picture naming. So this is the example. In tests, participants had to say as many words as possible within a 1 minute, starting with a given letter, or so they were asked to name animals beginning with F, A, or S in specific languages. And monolinguals always perform better. They can recall these words very quickly. Bilinguals take longer. Now, not much longer, but they still take longer. And there's a reason for it. As I said before, about the two languages are always forefront. So if you see a picture of something, the Irish word and the English word are competing, and that's going to take seconds for your brain to bring that to your mouth, for you to say the word, depending on whether the person wants it in Irish or in English. So obviously that's going to take longer. Also, when you speak two languages, you spend less time speaking each one of them. So I'm speaking English to you now, but I might not speak English again until tomorrow sometime. I might be speaking Irish the rest of the day, and then I'm less practiced at English and Irish because I'm doing both. So then words don't come as quickly. So it makes sense, that one. It's not something I would worry too much about, because it is something that you're going to have in the end two words. You'll have twice as good, but it is a fact, and it takes longer for those words to come through. So in bilingual education, I'm going to come back to those later on to see ways around it and what we can do. And just to go over the kind of bilingual education and how we got to where we are now. So there's the big movement in Canada. And all this, there's a lot of research that came out of Canada in the 60s and 70s, and that's really what kind of spurred us on to start it here in Ireland, north and south. It was really the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, when there was a big growth in Ollscoil. Of course, you know, it took a long time for the Shaw's Road to get recognition, so there wasn't a second one until the Good Friday Agreement, which is crazy when you think about it. It was just such a big long gap. While the south they were just opening loads, so that was our delay. But it's been a big explosion ever since, and we haven't really looked back. So research tells us that children can learn a second, a third, or more languages, and be linguistically and academically competent in them all. So there's no problem with children just taking on more and more languages. This is never ever an issue. And additive bilingualism is the aim. So that should be the kind of first and foremost. The additive bilingualism is when you add another language, but you don't damage the first. There was kind of a history in America with children coming to school with Spanish and speaking Spanish at home, and kind of told, I suppose the same thing happened in Ireland when you think about the Bata Scar and that kind of thing, when children weren't allowed to use their home language. So that's the opposite. So now we always go for additive bilingualism. You don't damage the first language, you just add another language. So high levels of both or more languages is the best. So try to aim as high as possible. You know, we're not kind of saying, oh, as long as they've got a few wee phrases in Irish, they'll be grand. We want to get them to as high a level as possible. And bilingualism is an asset to both the individual and to society. So we had said all this about how it makes you a better person. Basically, I was going to say gColáiste. See, there you go. It just comes in. So children, our aim in immersion education. So it's not just bilingual education that we have now, it's immersion education, where children are immersed in the second language from as young as possible. So that's the main thing there, that you try to get them in as young as possible. The additive approach where there's no detrimental cost to the first language. So that's important as well. The first language can actually be used as prior knowledge. So if they already know that's a tree, they already have that concept, they have that picture in their head, and they're just adding cran. So you're adding something else to it, and you already have it. So according to the threshold hypotheses, a reasonable level of competence must be achieved in the two languages in order to benefit from the advantages. So you want to get them to that highest level as possible. So it's therefore important in immersion education in Ireland that a strong form of bilingualism is fostered and that learners attain a high standard of Irish in order to benefit from the advantages. So there's no issue that they're gonna, you're gonna damage their English. And even this worry that some schools were kind of worried that, starting to learn English and whatever. I mean, when I was teaching, it was Rangacahar. They didn't do English until Rangacahar. And now it's kind of more Rangatree towards the end of Rangatree. But I mean, there's research in Ireland and across the world to say that it actually makes no difference. It doesn't make any difference. That even if you put it back later, they are still learning. There's a lot of, and we'll come back to that, the transfer of skills. So that it's still it doesn't have any detrimental effect to them at all. So there's always this issue, and when people are kind of talking about going to an Irish school and this kind of thing, does it harm their English? Does it harm their maths? Does it harm other subjects? And I just thought it was interesting to look at assessments, and these are kind of the more kind of national assessments that kind of prove that the children are functioning well. To just prove that. So 50 years ago, Peel and Lambert did their studies in Montreal. So as I say, it was Canada where this was, and the bilingual children outperformed the monolingual children in the same system. And after 6 years in education, they were then shown to catch up. So there's some assessments in the early years where obviously their English is not, or their first in Canada, it's French and English. So their English is lower than other schools, but obviously they haven't really begun their English yet. So then after 6 years, they've caught up. So there's no difference, there's no delay. And in Canada, they do that late as well. Welsh, the Welsh system do that as well. They don't start until the equivalent of our Rangacahar. They don't bring in English, and there's not an issue. So this is kind of, I thought it would be interesting for you to see about English reading. And these are the assessments. The way you always kind of hear these research things bandied around when you're talking about Gaels. Oh, but Gaelscoil children read better in English, or Gaelscoil children achieve better in maths. So it's kind of interesting to just look at some of the reports here. Now, the last one there was done in 2010, which is probably a good while ago. And I picked these ones specifically because these are the kind of official ones. These people have done master's studies in that sense. And there'll be more kind of recent stuff, but these ones here were the big national ones, so these were more probably accepted more, and you can just see the differences. These ones were English medium schools, so this is English reading in English medium schools, in Irish medium schools, Irish Gaelscoil and Gaeltacht schools, and in all of the English tests, as you can see there, the Irish medium, the Gaelscoils, had the most success in these assessments. So they were able to read better in English. So that's even given that they had a late start with English. And these tests were done with Rangadaw and Rangashay. And you can see the difference there, that they've done better in Rangashay, obviously, but they were still at a good level in Rangadaw. Now, that last point there, the socio-economic factors, these were all done in the south, in the 26 counties. So there's no research kind of in the north. There's too small a group to make comparisons, to make it official like this. So there was no research to compare, but Harris did make the point that Gaelscoils in the south have got higher level of the socio-economic factors, that they have more parents who have been to third level education and that kind of thing, and that has an effect on the children. But there was more recent research that I saw, a smaller study, and it was still coming up with the same results. So again, I'm not kind of saying they are doing better. I think the main point is they're not doing badly. I think people have this worry, oh, when you go to a Gaelscoil, you don't do English until whenever. surely they lose out in their English. They don't. So this proves that they don't do that. There's a lot of research. It's not just, and it was going back even 50 years to the Peel and Lambert research as well. So it's not just a one-off as well. This is kind of a list of different studies as well. And then in the maths, it's a similar picture. Although interestingly, the maths, this one, which was done, well, I don't have a year for that. Oh, 2009. So that was in 2009. And it's interesting that it was broken down. So that you've got application, problem solving, number and algebra, measuring data. So there was different results in different areas. And it would be interesting to go into that again and see, is this something to do with bilingualism? Do bilinguals do better in certain areas in maths? Or, you know, is it different? I know this is something that I've always kind of wanted to question, because I've heard this a lot, you know, when you hear other people talking or you hear things about Irish medium education, there's just kind of, oh, but they do better in maths. And you'll see kind of this kind of bandied about as well, that Irish medium children are better at maths than English medium children. And I kind of thought, having been a teacher, I don't remember being in front of a group of mathematical geniuses ever in a class, and it kind of always made me wonder, where does this come from? So I thought that was interesting, even looking at it. And I do remember that in this research they did highlight the point that if the maths questions are very wordy, it becomes kind of like a language thing, and that was an issue, that they're kind of reading and they're doing maths at the same time. So, you know, it depends on the test as well. If the test is less words and less reading, they'll do better. So, I mean, it was just interesting that they didn't do better in all areas. But the point again is, they're not going to Gaelscoil and failing their English and failing their maths. That's not happening at all. They're at the right level and they are doing well. So I think that's the important issue here. And I'm not going to come out with the line and say, oh, Gaelscoil children do better in maths than English school children, because that's not such a clear-cut picture there. And it's different areas they do better and different areas they don't, which is normal enough. I mean, you're going to get a mixture as well. The Gaelscoil children, if you look through that, most areas they did do better. So that is something, but not in all areas. So it's just interesting, you know, when you see it broken down that way. But the point is that it's not an issue. It's definitely not an issue. It's just kind of, they're just doing it in another language, and it's not a problem. One other aspect then of learning their, you know, having two languages or being bilingual is the aspect that they can learn another language just quicker, that they already have this meta-linguistic awareness. You already know that you can have other words for other things, that you can say things in different ways. So that's part of that as well. And the aspect of learning another language. The problem with that is, and I found this with my own children who were bilinguals from they were born and going to secondary school, it's the given, you know, when they're given a list of verbs and given a list of words, that doesn't work. They're used to immersion. And when they go to secondary school, suddenly they're learning a language instead of acquiring a language. Actually, only one of my children did keep on another language, and that was he did German in school. And it just so happened they had this fantastic teacher who did all classes through German, and he picked it up no bother. Whereas the others had this list of vocabulary, and so it's to do with approaches as well. So if you have an opportunity to support them with learning a third or fourth language with, I don't know, other ways. The way I went to the Cliath, you know, if you had another way, I mean, there's lots of resources online, even that Rosetta Stone is a very good approach, or Duolingo or something along those lines, where they're learning in a more immersive way rather than learning lists of words, because that's not a natural way. And it's just unfortunate that that's the way the secondary schools are doing it. There's also this issue of receptive skills and productive skills to do with linguistic development. And this is the big issue. This is the thing that I'm working on in my research. When I'm doing reading. That children are better with the receptive skills in Gaelscoil. So that's listening and understanding and reading. And they're not so hot on the productive skills of I'm just going to move myself and move this over the other side. The productive skills of speaking and writing. Writing is the hardest thing of all. That's the highest level, and that's very difficult. And to be able to have them at a better level of speaking, it's really not enough to just have Irish in school. And that's the big issue. And that's actually something that's come out of Canada and other countries as well, who are now going beyond just doing it in school and having after school clubs, evening clubs, and it's having a huge impact. So it's not enough to just have it in school. They need it, you know. So one of the limitations of immersion education is that children often fail to use their L2 beyond the school walls, limiting their L2 experience. And that's something we can do, you know, as communities. That's something we can work on and help support the schools. And that's very important. Maybe people think, oh, it's just, you know, they get enough in school, they're fine, but it just shows you that it's not enough. So this metalinguistic awareness as well, there are aspects of English that are similar to Irish, aspects of Irish that are similar, that are language specific. So some things are the same and some things are different. And that's basically when you're learning a language there was a kind of a time when people compartmentalize. It was now we're doing Irish, now we're doing English. Now the focus is on what do they have in common and what do they have that's different. So things like phonics are going to be very different in Irish and in English, obviously, but other things are the same. So some of the letters are the same. And when you teach children that way, it helps their metalinguistic awareness. They become aware, oh, that's what it is in Irish, but that's what it is in English. And they're comparing. So that's been proven that that's a better approach. I actually remember this as a teacher wondering, I wonder, should you do them separately or should you do things together? And we just didn't know. But now when you see research and you see these kind of things, you know that that's the way it is. And this is the big thing as well, when I was talking about the later start to English. This is the basic underlying proficiency. And they often use the iceberg. That's meant to be an iceberg. There's an iceberg, and a lot of the information of language is underneath the surface. And then you have the two wee sticky outy bits where those are the differences. So there's a massive amount that is the same. So if your child is learning to read in Irish, there's loads and loads of skills in there that they can apply to other languages that they then don't need to be taught again. They only need to get the specifics, the bits that are only about English or the bits that are only about French. They've already got this big, massive amount. And it explains, I remember when I taught Rangacooig, and in those days, the school that I was working in, the children had only started English in Rangacahar. So they only had 1 year of English and they were reading everything. I couldn't have gone, oh, how are they reading these books? This is amazing. And that's why they have that basic underlying proficiency that they just transfer across languages. And it kind of happens a lot without you even thinking about it. So they can transfer languages across, and their skills, across languages. So a child can learn to read in English and then use those skills to read Polish at home. Or a child who learns to read in Irish can transfer those skills to read in English. So that explains why that happens. And it is amazing when you see it, when they pick up English books and can just use the same skills and read in English. It is pretty amazing. And that's why, because they've already got all those skills. So the skills that transfer are, I'll move that one in the end, concepts of print. So full stops, commas, question marks. You don't need to teach all that twice. They've got it. They did it in Irish, so they already know it. Phonological awareness is the same in Irish and English. So if you're doing rhymes and syllables with them in English, they'll get them in Irish. If you're doing it in Irish, they'll get them in English. It's the same. Concepts of phonics. Now, when I say concepts, that idea of breaking down a word, covering syllables, that kind of a thing. Obviously, the sounds are different, but the concepts, how you go about it, are the same. The strategies to learn new words, do you remember them? Do you break them down? Do you look at their shape? That's the same in any language. Genres, if they're reading kind of a cookery book, they'll know how to read a cookery book in any language. And comprehension strategies. So if they're predicting, now these are going to come to me in Irish, if they're questioning or predicting or like bunch Tathalas, whatever that is, those things that they do in comprehension, they'll do that, and it's a concept. So they can tell you what they think might happen at the end of a chapter. It doesn't matter whether that's in Irish or in English. It's the concept of doing that. So all these things all transfer, and they can do those in both languages or in any amount of languages. So what can we do? So this is my end. This is me finishing up now. I'm going to finish on what can we do to, with these. The cognitive stuff is all brilliant, and there's no reason why you wouldn't send your child to Ollscoile if you're going on the cognitive. The cognitive benefits alone would be they're just fantastic. And I mean, in any language, I mean, if you had a choice between giving your child 2 languages or 1, it's, there's no decision to make. Of course you would pick 2. And even if it was, I don't know, Farsi, any language is going to be better than having 1. And then that's another thing. What's the point in learning Irish? Sure, nobody speaks Irish. There's so many points. There's just so much, so many advantages to having it. So those issues that I did mention about the linguistics, we can do something about that. So one of the things is we can help the children achieve as high a standard as possible in their languages. That's a goal that we can, as teachers and as educators, we can help them get to that level. Try to increase their exposure to Irish outside school hours. So if your school can have a breakfast club or I remember in school the principal being opposed to a breakfast club because, and I could see, they should have breakfast with their family. But from a linguistic aspect, it's a good thing, that they're getting more Irish. They're being exposed to it early in the morning, later in the evening, after schools clubs, and maybe their sports club through Irish, that kind of thing that they're doing outside school. It's also an association thing as well. If they think, oh, I just go through the gates in school and that's when we speak Irish, outside school it's all English. It's that as well. You want to give them kind of that different association. So the receptive skills as well, we can help them with these, with more listening and reading, and the productive, letting them speak more and helping them with their writing skills. So just kind of breaking it up like that, you can focus on them and try to get that standard up. Vocabulary, vocabulary, and vocabulary. And when I say vocabulary, it doesn't matter what language it is. A child who has a big vocabulary in English tends to have a big vocabulary in other languages as well, because they have this kind of need for more words, and you've just widened their vocabulary in English, so they want those words in Irish as well. So even don't worry about, oh, I'll not be telling them too many words in English because they might get confused. No, that gives them more. It kind of strengthens them. It gives them that capacity for growth, and that idea that vocabulary is powerful, that if you know lots of words, you can say lots of things, and then you want to do that in the other language as well. So it gives them that motivation to learn more. Talk, talk, and talk, again, in any language. Doesn't matter even if you speak Chinese at home, talk to them. Just talk to them all the time in any language. Again, it's just this idea that talking is something that you practice. It's also to do with listening and focusing. And talking is just brilliant. Talking with young children is so beneficial to them. Just talk to them nonstop. They are soaking that all in. And, you don't need to simplify things for them either. Try to talk to them and give them words. Tell them what things are. If there's flowers growing in the garden, don't just say, look at the lovely flowers. Tell them, look at the lovely rhododendrons. Look at the lovely daisies. Give them the specifics. And then they want to know, well, what's that in Irish? Well, how would I say that in Irish? And then that's giving them that kind of bigger picture. Books, stories, rhymes, and jingles, again, in any language. The more exposure they can get to all these things, and rhymes are so valuable. The fact this whole idea of rhyming words is, you might think it's just a bit of crack and a bit of fun, and it's just having a bit of a laugh with language. Rhyming actually helps with spelling later on, because they're saying things that sound the same, and then when they're spelling things, they sound the same, but you spell them differently. So that's going towards spelling words. So it's all very important. Everything kind of feeds in. So books, stories, rhymes, and jingles in any language whatsoever will help them. So these are things that we can do, practical things that we can all do to help kind of raise the standards. There's just a few references if anyone wants to go and do a bit of reading on stuff. But I wanted to end with this because I saw this online. I just thought it was lovely. All the different aspects of, bilingualism. Now this is about Spanish, so here you've got, I can communicate with all these Spanish speakers. So I mean, obviously we'd be talking about Irish and English, so you can speak to people through Irish and English. Research says my bilingual brain is great focus, better at differentiating sounds, better able to prove and solve problems. So it's all the kind of positives here. It's just I'll have more job opportunities. I use both of my languages to think and learn, and I have a unique way of looking at understanding the world. So that's gone back to the kind of the positives at the start. So hopefully you were able to get something out of that. And I've probably, well, we started a bit late, so I've gone a wee bit over time. So I don't know, does anyone have any questions or want to?
Jackie, just one question I always get asked in the Néill from parents, you know, for children with speech and language maybe difficulties, maybe they're seeing speech therapists, or maybe they're just maybe not quite where they would be expected to be going into P1 or Rangahin, and they're a bit apprehensive of sending them on. What would you say to parents in that situation?
I would kind of go back to that idea that most of the world is bilingual, and what do they do? You know, do people living in countries where they, you know, say Sweden, and where they have Swedish and probably German from no age at all, they're not going to say, oh, we'll just stick to one language because, you know, oh, they might, you know, you just get on with it. I mean, other countries can do this. I'm not a special needs expert, but sometimes having an option can give them another route. And I know that's the case with phonics, because phonics in Irish is easier than it is in English. And for children struggling to read or spell or write, sometimes Irish is a better route for them. And it's easier if they take that route. And then when they're a wee bit more mature and have got the concepts, then English comes easier to them as well. So sometimes by giving them another route or another sound system, and I think as well, I don't know how you feel, Gráinne, but sometimes whenever you're dealing with another language and you're maybe sounding things out, you're kind of more aware of children as well and what they're able to do at an earlier stage, you know. And some, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't kind of push anyone to do something they weren't comfortable with ever. And I think that's probably part of it too. You know, the parents need to feel comfortable themselves. And you probably, you know, you'd be working with them and would know them better. But just coming from as an outsider perspective, you know, it just seems kind of, what do other countries do? You know, everybody else does this, and other countries are bilingual, and it's not an issue. You just kind of do it, and the kids, you know, they kind of just move on. But
sometimes I feel it benefits children maybe who need that wee extra bit of you know, the extra visuals or the hand signals, and it aids their understanding of communication.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly, because you're teaching a language that probably most of the class don't have, most of the group don't have. You're having to use all these extra resources. So for children who have other needs, that's going to benefit them as well. Yeah, that's actually a very good point. Yeah.
And another question parents always come to me after saying, we don't have Irish at home, you know, is this going to be impact on my child, or will I be able to help them? So what would you say?
Well, again, I mean, you know, they're going to get it in school, and, you know, as many opportunities as possible. And again, I do think that this is the whole thing about getting it outside school as well, and that they try to take up these opportunities of different clubs and whatever, or different activities that are, I mean, there are loads of activities on through Irish that I mean, maybe some parents think, oh, they're fine, they get enough at school, but they really do need to have it as well outside school. But I think, I mean, the majority of children in Irish medium schools, they don't have Irish at home, and teachers they cater for that. That's part of the system, you know, that everything is made very clear. And I know a lot of schools were using things like Seesaw and apps. I mean, I didn't have all that when I was at school. It was more just everybody come in for a meeting and we'll talk about it. But now there's new technology. They can use all these different ways to support parents at home, and that's probably, as you say, you know, because you're given all this extra stuff, they're getting extra help.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel sorry for poor teachers who have to do all this extra, but it's, you know, it's definitely, I mean, parents are catered for, and you're not in the minority, you're actually the majority. My children were the minority who had Irish at home. They were the only ones, and they were the different ones. Everyone else doesn't have Irish at home, and therefore the schools and the teachers, they cater for that. And you know yourself, I'm sure you're using different things with parents just to keep them on board.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know, has anybody else any questions? Or even if you want to pop one into the chat, if you don't want to come on the camera.
Jacqueline, I was wondering, you know when when you're half expecting for kids, so you start and you're thinking about maybe going down a bilingual route. Maybe if you're expecting to think about down a route, but you're worried about your quality of Irish. I was kind of worried. I don't think I've got the capacity to raise kids through Irish, because my Irish is good, and you kind of learn that you tend to read that kids will associate one parent with one language, one parent with another, if you're going. And so what would you say to parents whose Irish is they've got kind of a wee bit, should they throw in Irish phrases like AOI, agus?
Absolutely use it as much as you possibly can.
So mixing is okay.
Absolutely. Now, as you say, they do associate. I mean, only for the fact that we did it from day one. You can't kind of switch when they get to like 3 and say, well, I think we'll speak Irish now.
Yeah.
They can't, because they've got used to you. You're that parent who speaks that language.
Yeah.
It's very hard for children to change, but absolutely use it as much as you possibly can, because the more they hear, and they will answer in English. I mean, members of my family who's, they don't speak Irish, but they do that, use as many phrases as possible. And then they're saying to me, but he always answers me in English. Of course he will, because he associates you with English, but it doesn't matter, keep at it.
Yeah.
And just the more they hear, and even it's good for you that you're using it and you're talking to yourself a lot of the time, but at least you're using it, and they're hearing it. Just it's all about exposure, definitely. And I wouldn't even worry, if you have a wee bit, just use it. I wouldn't worry thinking, oh, I'm not perfect here. Nobody is, and we've all, I don't know about everybody, but I learned Irish as a second language. I mean, I'm not a native speaker, but you do your best, and we're all always learning, and definitely, use it as much as you possibly can. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
I can't see any other questions coming in here, but Jackie, Gráinne Ní Fhlanagáin, that was very, very helpful, and I'm sure it'll answer a lot of questions for anybody who maybe is thinking about immersion education or raising their children bilingually. So Gráinne Ní Fhlanagáin our son Chomhairleoir Oideachais agus Scoil Shéamuis Néill Gráinne Ní
agus an carú agus when my soltas Sprago. It's very positive. It's all very positive.
Definitely, yeah.
Positive things for change. Too many negative things going on. We can do something positive.